Imagine watching someone struggle against a system they once trusted, only to realize it was never built to protect them. What would you do in that moment? Would you step in and stand by their side, or would you speak out against the injustice? Comment 1 if you'd take a stand, or 2 if you'd raise your voice. Welcome to Motivation for Success, where every story is a spark of hope and every act of courage is a call to action. Today's story is one that cuts to the heart of what it means to do what's right, especially when it matters most. As you listen, you might find echoes of your own experiences, moments when the odds were stacked against you or someone you cared about. But this isn't just a story, it's a reminder of the power of empathy, unity, and the courage to protect one another. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to Motivation for Success. Because every day brings a new opportunity to turn compassion into action, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was a mild afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day when the sky seems painted in soft watercolors, warm hues of amber melding with gentle strokes of lavender. The sun hung low on the horizon, its light shimmering off high-rise windows and spilling onto the sidewalks below. There was a relaxed buzz in the air. You could almost feel the pulse of the city through the rhythm of distant traffic. As you walked along Wilshire Boulevard, each step carried the echoes of car horns, the scuff of shoes on concrete, and the murmured voices of strangers passing by. But even amid this steady hum of activity, there was something especially captivating about that day. Perhaps it was the gentle breeze carrying the scent of fresh coffee from a corner cafe. Perhaps it was the sense that something, an unseen force, was about to crack the veneer of everyday life. Most residents would never have guessed they were about to witness a moment of moral courage that would ripple far beyond the intersection of Wilshire and the rest of the city. Standing near the busy thoroughfare was the familiar edifice of the First American Bank. To the uninitiated, it might look like any other financial institution, a place where you deposit checks, withdraw cash, and handle routine tasks without much thought. But the unassuming walls of this bank were about to bear witness to an extraordinary confrontation that would challenge the system itself. The bank's lobby was a polished landscape of marble floors, bright fluorescent lights, and a buzzing chorus of printers and computers. Customers came and went in an unending flow, some in suits and ties rushing to their next meeting, others in casual attire, carrying grocery bags or pushing strollers. Each was lost in their own world, juggling errands and obligations. Amid the typical hustle, an unspoken tension hovered in the air. For many who had stood in line, it felt like an invisible weight pressing on their shoulders. Stress, fatigue, frustration. All these emotions, swirling just beneath the surface, waiting for the slightest spark. You could see it in how people sighed as they checked the time on their phones, in how they shifted their weight from one foot to the other, in how their eyes flickered between the monotony of their day and the hope that someone would greet them with empathy. Behind the front service desks were bank employees tapping away at keyboards, scanning documents, and placidly repeating well-rehearsed greetings. Good afternoon, welcome to First American Bank. How can I help you? The routine was mechanical, perfected from countless interactions. Yet beneath that veneer of efficiency, impatience lurked, especially for a teller named Chloe Anderson, whose preoccupied mind had little space for pleasantries. In the midst of this organized chaos stood Eleanor Hayes, a 73-year-old retired schoolteacher who had arrived with a sense of calm determination. Her silver hair had been neatly swept back, revealing kind eyes that hinted at a lifetime of nurturing young minds. Eleanor had taught elementary school for over 4 decades, guiding generations of children through the basics of reading, math, and the quiet lessons of kindness and respect. Now, in her retirement, she lived on a modest pension, carefully balancing her checkbook to ensure every dollar was accounted for. She had been banking with First American for 35 years, her loyalty unwavering. She cherished the personal connection she once felt there, back when local bank tellers recognized her and asked about her students. But over time, the warmth had cooled. The personal notes had been replaced with automated messages, the friendly faces replaced by new hires who seemed too busy to notice the older woman standing before them. Today, Eleanor held a worn envelope, its edges softened by time. Inside were statements showing a series of suspicious fees eating away at her account balance. She had combed through every line item, double-checking with her old-fashioned calculator to confirm that this couldn't be right. Her hands trembled slightly, not just from age but from the quiet fear that she was losing control of her financial security. Stepping up to the counter, she inhaled a steadying breath, reminding herself that she had every right to ask questions. Chloe Anderson, the teller on duty, was in her mid-20s, juggling her own life's challenges, a looming student loan, rent in a city known for high housing costs, and a desk covered in post-it notes about performance targets. Today had already been long, and a silent frustration simmered beneath her polite exterior. When Eleanor approached, Chloe barely glanced up, her eyes fixed on the computer. "Good afternoon," Eleanor began, voice soft but resolute. "I have some questions about these charges on my account." She slid the worn envelope across the counter, her careful hands revealing pages of highlighted statements. Chloe sighed, a slight roll of her eyes betraying her impatience. "Those are standard maintenance fees," she replied in a clipped tone. "They're applied automatically." The words felt cold against Eleanor's ears. But she pressed on, gently, "I've been a customer here for over 3 decades. I've never had these fees before. Could you please tell me why they're appearing now?" Chloe gave a dismissive shrug, barely skimming the papers. "If you didn't read the new policy, that's on you," she said flatly. In that moment, the indignity of it all cut through Eleanor like a cold wind. She could feel the gaze of other customers, some looking on with concern, others focusing on their phones as if to avoid getting involved. For Eleanor, someone who had spent a lifetime teaching children to be courteous, respectful, and empathetic, the irony was stinging. She was being treated like an inconvenience by an institution she had trusted for most of her adult life. She opened her mouth to speak again, but her words got stuck in her throat. Was this worth a fight? Would they even care? Just then, the automated doors of the bank slid open with a gentle chime, catching the attention of everyone in the room. Standing in the doorway was a man in a simple black t-shirt, faded jeans, and a baseball cap. He walked with a quiet confidence, neither hurried nor tentative, and as he removed his cap, his face became visible. A sudden hush fell over the bank lobby. Phones paused mid-scroll, conversations stopped mid-sentence. It was Keanu Reeves, an iconic actor known not just for his roles on screen, but for his humble demeanor off-screen. He was no stranger to public spaces or fan attention, yet on this day, it was his resolute gaze that spoke volumes. He scanned the room and seemed to sense the tension so palpable, you could almost feel it pulsing under the fluorescent lights. Chloe Anderson's fingers froze on the keyboard. She lifted her eyes, and in a moment of startled recognition, the color drained slightly from her cheeks. Meanwhile, the branch manager, Martin Cole, stepped forward. Martin was a man who prided himself on an impeccably pressed suit and a firm handshake. He believed in order and control, and rarely tolerated disruptions of any kind, even from a celebrity. Keanu walked purposefully toward the counter, positioning himself beside Eleanor. His voice was gentle but firm. "Excuse me," he addressed Chloe, "I couldn't help but notice how you were speaking to Mrs. Hayes. Why are you dismissing her concerns?" A ripple ran through the crowd. Some shifted closer, intrigued by this unexpected twist. Others grabbed their phones, poised to record. Chloe's composure faltered as she tried to maintain control of the situation. "Sir, we have policies to follow here," she managed, though her voice wavered. At that moment, Martin Cole approached with quick strides, wearing a look that suggested he'd prefer to escort Keanu out of the building rather than deal with this public spectacle. "Excuse me, but who are you to question our procedures?" he asked, irritation breaking through his practiced civility. Keanu removed his cap. His gaze was direct, unyielding in its insistence on basic decency. "I'm Keanu Reeves," he said simply. "But I'm not here because of my name. I'm here because no one should be dismissed when they raise a valid concern, especially someone who's been loyal to this bank for decades." Turning his attention back to Eleanor, Keanu's voice softened with empathy. "Mrs. Hayes, would you please tell me what happened?" Eleanor, eyes brimming with unshed tears, recounted her story. She described the steady stream of unannounced fees, how she'd noticed them only by meticulously reviewing her bank statements, and how her pension wasn't large enough to sustain these unexpected deductions without notice. Her words wavered as she spoke, the hurt and disappointment weighing heavily on each sentence. A collective hush settled over the onlookers. Even those who had tried to avoid eye contact earlier were now drawn in by the gravity of Eleanor's plight, and by the presence of a man unafraid to speak up for someone he barely knew. Martin Cole attempted to reassert control. "We follow corporate guidelines," he explained in clipped tones. "If a customer's balance falls below the required minimum, fees are automatically applied. It's clearly stated in our policy." Keanu crossed his arms lightly, his posture both relaxed and resolute. "But do you ever reconsider these guidelines? Do you verify whether the charges were communicated effectively? Do you think about how they affect people on fixed incomes?" His questions hung in the air like an uncomfortably bright light, illuminating the frailties of a system that prioritized revenue over empathy. Martin cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "The system is accurate," he insisted, but even he seemed less certain with each word. "We rely on it, and so do our customers." Turning to the rest of the lobby, Keanu addressed the silent observers. "How many of you have faced unexpected fees from your bank?" he asked, voice echoing with the weight of unspoken grievances. A tentative hand rose in the air. Then another. Soon, a dozen customers lifted their hands, exchanging knowing looks. A middle-aged man in a work uniform, a frazzled young mother with a stroller, an elderly couple who glanced at each other before raising their hands, each one revealed they, too, had experienced the sting of surprise charges, quietly absorbing the financial shock. "You see," Keanu said, shifting his gaze back to Martin, "this isn't just about Mrs. Hayes. She's the voice for many others. How we treat her is how we treat all our customers." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Suddenly, the bank's routine transactions felt more like a communal stand against impersonal corporate policies. In that moment, the building ceased to be just another bank. It was now the epicenter of a call for accountability. Under the weight of collective scrutiny, Martin Cole's assertive facade cracked. He looked at Chloe, whose eyes were downcast, and then at Eleanor, who clutched her worn envelope with quiet dignity. He seemed to realize that continuing to stonewall would only further erode the bank's reputation, and possibly his own position. "I apologize for any confusion," Martin finally conceded, his voice subdued. "We'll reverse these fees and review our policy to prevent something like this from happening again." You could feel the tension in the room dissipate like a breath held too long finally being released. A small wave of applause and relieved whispers passed among the customers. Some recorded the moment on their phones, capturing the instant an ordinary woman and an unlikely ally confronted an institution and won a measure of justice. Eleanor blinked back tears. She had come in fearful and uncertain, but now felt a spark of triumph. "Thank you," she whispered, her gratitude carrying a weight of relief. Keanu offered a comforting hand on her shoulder, and she realized in that moment how powerful it could be to have someone by your side, someone willing to raise their voice when yours trembled. Although the incident resolved in that single afternoon, the impact went far beyond the walls of First American Bank. Within hours, the story was shared on social media, smartphone videos of Keanu Reeves advocating for a senior citizen, images of Martin Cole's reluctant apology, interviews with customers who felt finally seen. Every like, share, and comment added to a growing wave of indignation about corporate indifference and hidden fees. By the following day, national news outlets had picked it up. Talk show hosts debated the ethics of automated fees, financial analysts weighed in on consumer rights, and viewers far from Los Angeles recognized their own experiences in Eleanor's. Before long, the CEO of First American Bank made a public statement promising a thorough investigation into these unauthorized fee practices. Indeed, an internal audit soon confirmed that many longtime customers had been automatically charged for failing to meet new minimum balance requirements, implemented without sufficient public notice. Faced with the outcry, the bank instituted policy changes, refunded fees, and restructured how they would communicate any future charges. Martin Cole was quietly removed from his managerial position. In the background of all this turmoil, Eleanor Hayes became a symbol of resilience. The quiet teacher who had spent her life giving patience and kindness to her students was now cast into an unexpected spotlight. She received letters from strangers across the country, some shared their own banking horror stories, others simply thanked her for taking a stand. She even got invitations to speak at local community groups focused on consumer advocacy. People wanted to know how this gentle woman had found the courage to hold her ground. Several weeks later, Eleanor was at home, flipping through her mailbox. Amid the usual bills and advertisements, she found a crisp white envelope embossed with the logo of a major film studio. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mrs. Hayes. You've shown us that true strength comes from within. Sometimes all it takes is a compassionate voice to remind us of our own power. Thank you for being an inspiration to so many. Keanu." Tucked alongside it was a glossy poster of Keanu Reeves' next film, signed with a personal dedication to Eleanor. There was also an invitation to the premiere. She stared at the note for a long moment, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. It wasn't the celebrity status or the glamorous invitation that moved her the most, it was the affirmation that her quiet bravery had mattered, that she'd been seen and heard. In the months that followed, Eleanor found herself speaking more openly about consumer rights. She appeared at local senior centers, where she guided older residents on how to carefully review financial statements and question unexpected charges. She encouraged them to stand up for themselves if something seemed amiss. Her once private concerns had blossomed into a mission that resonated with so many others. She would always mention that you never truly know where help can come from, that sometimes, it arrives in the form of a stranger who just happens to be a famous actor. But the true moral of her story, she insisted, was that each of us has a voice worth raising, and we can make a difference when we use it. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves continued his life in the public eye, shooting films, attending premieres, and graciously interacting with fans. Yet in interviews, when asked about his act of advocacy, he downplayed his own role. "I was just standing up for what's right," he would say simply. Anyone could do the same. The resonance of that afternoon at First American Bank extended further than anyone could have imagined. Social media feeds lit up with personal accounts of unfair fees, outdated policies, and unhelpful customer service across various industries. From hospitals to insurance companies, people began to question the fine print they had once accepted without a second thought. Groups formed online and in local communities to share resources on consumer protection. People swapped stories of taking control of their finances, challenging unwarranted charges, and holding institutions accountable for their actions. What began as one woman's fear of losing her hard-earned pension transformed into a broader conversation about systemic fairness. All the while, the simple question that started it all, if you saw someone being treated unfairly, how would you respond? Echoed in countless comments and reposts, reminding everyone of the essential truth at the heart of the matter: change often begins with a single act of courage. It's easy to feel powerless at times, especially in a world where large institutions seem guided by algorithms and profit margins more than human empathy. But stories like Eleanor's remind us that institutions are, at their core, made up of individuals, people who can choose to act with compassion, fairness, and understanding. When Keanu Reeves stepped in, he did what anyone who believes in basic decency might do if they felt empowered to speak up. His fame drew the cameras, but it was his genuine concern that resonated with millions. Eleanor herself was the catalyst. She asked for nothing more than a fair explanation, a modicum of respect for the decades she had entrusted her money to the bank. All of us can learn from this. Perhaps you've been on the receiving end of some injustice, uncertain whether speaking up would change anything. Or maybe you've witnessed another person's struggle, wondering if your support could make a difference. This story is proof that it can, that every voice, no matter how soft, holds the potential to inspire change when it is raised in pursuit of fairness and respect. Now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to speak out against something that felt unjust? Or maybe you stood beside someone else who needed that extra strength. Share your story in the comments. Your experiences could be the spark that gives someone else the courage to take action in their own life. It's time we remember our collective power. When we come together, we can push back against systems designed to prioritize the bottom line over human dignity. Whether you choose to respond with a raised hand in solidarity, a polite complaint letter, or a passionate video exposing wrongdoing, your voice has weight. Use it. Before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to Motivation for Success. Each story we share is a reminder that hope and triumph are real possibilities. We believe in the power of collective action and the power of empathy to reshape our communities for the better. By subscribing, you join a growing movement of people who strive to make each day a new opportunity for fairness, kindness, and resilience. As you go about your day, keep this lesson in mind: sometimes, it only takes one moment of courage to dismantle a seemingly unshakable system. Whether it's questioning a hidden bank charge, advocating for a fair policy at work, or simply being present for someone who's silently struggling, your courage can light the way for others. Eleanor Hayes found her voice after decades of quiet routine, and Keanu Reeves used his platform to amplify it. But this isn't just their story, it's yours, too. We all have a part to play. Every time we raise a hand for fairness, speak up against injustice, or extend a hand to someone in need, we make the world a little more just, a little more humane. Remember, no system is too vast to question, and no individual is too small to matter. Let the story of Eleanor Hayes and Keanu Reeves be a testament to the ripple effect of kindness and unity. It shows that the power of compassion can dismantle walls that seem insurmountable. It underscores that when good people refuse to stand by, the status quo must shift. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being open to the message that real change is possible. We invite you to reflect on this story, share it with friends and loved ones, and keep this conversation alive. Your experiences and insights can inspire those who might feel alone or powerless in the face of injustice. In the end, remember to subscribe to the Motivation for Success channel, where we believe that hope can be ignited by a single act of bravery, and that each of us has a role in creating a fairer, more compassionate world. Never underestimate the difference your voice can make. Stand tall, speak out, and let your actions define the change you wish to see. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience, transformation, and hope. Now, it's your moment to act. Comment below with your thoughts, share your own stories of defiance and courage, and be the light for someone who may be waiting in darkness. Remember that the power to make a difference is in your hands, and together, we can build a community that champions dignity, respect, and unwavering kindness for all.